You didn't even ask me. The text message blinked on my phone, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Colorado Rockies, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose, but the warmth of the morning did nothing to ease the cold knot twisting in my stomach. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10, enjoy the story. My name is Ethan Cooper, and I had spent the last 8 months deployed overseas, navigating dust storms and concrete jungles far from home, but nothing had prepared me for the sight that awaited me on the phone screen. The neighbor across the street, someone I'd waved to countless times during morning jogs, had sent me a series of photographs showing strangers moving furniture into my living room, my dining room, and even my father's study, the very study where he'd meticulously collected decades of documents, awards, and memories. I could almost smell the varnish on the polished oak floors through the photos, the scent of leather from the chairs lining the study, and the faint hint of my grandmother's rose-scented candles, the ones she always lit on Sunday mornings, now surrounded by people I had never met. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the accompanying email from Olivia, the HOA president, claiming that she had leased my property without my knowledge while I was away, citing some vague clause in the HOA bylaws that I had never signed. Her tone was clinical, almost smug, as if typing words on a screen could somehow erase the fact that this house had been in my family for 3 generations. I could hear the faint creak of the front gate in my memory, the gravel crunching beneath my boots whenever I walked the perimeter to check the fencing before deployment, the rustle of the wind moving through the tall pines lining the driveway, and suddenly it felt like each sound was mocking me from across the continent. I thought of the security camera I had installed last year, now useless because I wasn't there to monitor it, and the feeling of helplessness hit like a tidal wave. My mind raced back to the morning spent in the kitchen with my dad, the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air, and the way sunlight fell across the hardwood floors, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the memories themselves. And then there was the realization that this wasn't just a matter of furniture or property, it was about respect, legacy, and the integrity of the family name that had been painstakingly built over decades. I could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline as my fingers gripped the phone tighter, imagining every possible legal avenue, every military procedure I could call upon, every ounce of discipline ingrained from years of service that I would need to navigate this civil storm. Outside, the morning air was crisp with the scent of pine needles and freshly fallen dew, and I could hear the faint chirp of sparrows that had nested near the window I used to clean each Saturday morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house had always been a place of peace, yet through these images on a screen, it had become a battlefield. My reflection caught in the glossy surface of my coffee mug as I stared at the screen, and I could almost see the tension etched into my face, the tight set of my jaw, the narrowed eyes, all signs that this battle would not be fought with silence. Somewhere deep down, a sense of resolve began to take hold, the same quiet, disciplined resolve that had carried me through ambushes, patrols, and the endless deserts of foreign lands. I could feel it settle like a second skin over my shoulders, the subtle shift of weight that told me I was preparing for action, and in that moment, even across thousands of miles, I knew I would not let this stand. The gravel under the front gate in my memory seemed to crunch louder now, each echo a drumbeat counting down to a plan, a methodical sequence of moves I would execute with precision, patience, and intelligence. And the house, my father's house, my home, it waited silently, filled with the scent of varnish, leather, and memory, waiting for me to reclaim it. The screen went dark as I set the phone down, but the adrenaline remained, buzzing through my veins like electricity coursing along copper wire. Every sense heightened, every thought honed, and I realized that this was no longer just about a house. It was about honor, history, and justice, and I would see it restored. The house itself was more than just a building, it was the culmination of decades of effort, the physical embodiment of family legacy and countless Saturday mornings spent maintaining its foundation and the surrounding yard. The front porch, wide enough to host small gatherings during summer evenings, still smelled faintly of cedar and sun-baked wood, a scent that triggered memories of my father teaching me to sand the railings until they gleamed in the Colorado sunlight. Every corner held a story, the faint indent of a doorknob my mother had polished every week, the slight groove along the hallway floor where my sister had run her roller skates as a child, and the small patch of garden by the kitchen window where my grandmother had carefully planted marigolds that now seemed to wilt under the care of strangers. I walked through each mental snapshot, the details more vivid than any photograph could capture, each memory reinforcing the sense of ownership that went far beyond legal documentation. The driveway, long and winding, stretched down past a line of pines that had provided both shade and privacy for decades, and I remembered checking the alignment of each stone and gravel section before leaving for deployment, ensuring that every turn was secure, the surface smooth enough for vehicles but rugged enough to withstand winter ice and spring rains. The kitchen echoed with the faint scent of coffee and old oak, mingling with the morning chill that crept through the slightly cracked windows, and I could almost hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the quiet tick of the wall clock, and the occasional chirp of the sparrows nesting outside. These details were etched into my memory with the same precision I had applied to tactical maps and operational plans, a catalogue of sensory information that allowed me to navigate the house without seeing it for months. I thought about the careful documentation my father had kept, the deeds, tax assessments, and letters that had passed from generation to generation, each one a testament to our right to this home, and I realized that the true strength of the property lay not in the wood, stone, or glass, but in the knowledge, respect, and stewardship that my family had maintained over the years. Every cabinet door, polished and lined up, every window frame, square and unwarped, was a silent witness to the diligence and care embedded in this place. I imagined standing at the edge of the living room, tracing the outline of the rug with my eyes, recalling how my father would walk across the room in the early morning light, sipping his coffee, lost in thought yet always aware of every detail, and that awareness was now mine to wield, my inherited understanding of the property and its rhythms. Even the outdoor elements, the smell of pine resin mixed with the dew on the grass, the soft rustle of the leaves as wind swept through the trees, and the distant sound of a creek trickling over rocks, all painted a portrait of home that no signed paper could ever fully convey. It was this deep familiarity and personal connection that would guide every decision, every strategy, and every interaction as I began to chart the course to reclaim what was rightfully mine, knowing that knowledge and careful observation were just as powerful as any formal authority or external support. In the stillness of the early morning, with the sun cresting the horizon and the chill of the high-altitude air brushing against my face, I felt a sense of quiet determination solidify, the kind that had been honed over years of service and countless missions, now ready to be applied in the theater of my own neighborhood, and I knew that every step I would take to restore this home would be measured, deliberate, and guided by the intimate understanding of its history, its smells, its sounds, and its soul. By late morning, the neighborhood was alive with its usual rhythm, birds flitting between branches and the soft hum of a distant lawn mower cutting fresh grass. I could picture Olivia moving through the streets, clipboard in hand, her perfectly polished white sneakers clicking against the concrete as she reviewed neighborhood compliance like a queen, surveying her realm. I remembered the email she had sent, the carefully chosen words designed to appear authoritative, each sentence cloaked in civility yet heavy with implication, demanding that the tenants follow rules they had no idea existed. The air smelled faintly of pine from the surrounding trees, mixed with the faint tang of fresh paint from a neighbor's new fence, and it struck me how normal everything seemed while underneath, the tension was building like a storm about to break. I thought about the interior of the house, the kitchen countertops that gleamed with morning light, the tiles reflecting the sun as though mocking the intrusion that had taken place, and I could almost hear the gentle tick of the wall clock that had measured every second of my absence. Every room had a memory embedded within it, from the worn leather armchair by the window where I used to read letters from home, to the old bookshelf where my father had kept decades of records and photographs. I could feel the weight of those memories pressing against the present reality, a quiet urgency that demanded attention. I began reviewing the documents my father had left, scanning each line carefully, noting dates, signatures, and clauses, the small print that spoke volumes about ownership, tenancy, and the protections afforded to military personnel deployed overseas. The details revealed a landscape of rights and responsibilities that had been ignored or misrepresented by Olivia, and the clarity of those facts settled over me like a shield. I imagined walking through the hallways of the house in my mind, the faint creak of each floorboard underfoot, the cool touch of the wooden railing along the staircase, and each sound reinforced the truth that this home was mine, by law, by history, and by the labor of those who had come before me. The thought of the front yard, where the morning dew still clung to the grass in delicate beads, and the driveway lined with pine needles and small rocks carefully placed to mark the edge, reminded me of the care that had been invested into every inch of property, care that no outsider could replicate. I considered reaching out to my old platoon, the team that had shared years of discipline, observation, and strategy with me, knowing that their experience, guidance, and perspective would be invaluable in navigating this challenge. Each scenario played out in my mind with meticulous precision, as if I were conducting a rehearsal, measuring timing, potential responses, and the chain of steps necessary to reclaim what had been taken. I felt a quiet determination solidify, a mental mapping of the house, the property lines, and the sequence of actions required to assert control and restore order. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying with it the scent of late morning warmth and the faint smell of freshly baked bread from a neighbor's kitchen, grounding me in the sensory reality while my thoughts moved through layers of strategy, law, and familial duty. I knew that patience and knowledge would be my allies, that every observation, every detail, every fact meticulously recorded would form the foundation of the next steps, and that the house, the yard, and every memory within its walls would be approached with deliberate action, guided by experience, vigilance, and a clear sense of purpose. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows from the tall pines onto the gravel driveway, each stone glinting in the light as if waiting for my return. I could hear the distant hum of a lawn mower somewhere down the street, the steady rhythm punctuated by the occasional chirp of birds, a reminder that life went on even as my own property had been disrupted. I sat at the edge of my father's study, the polished wood reflecting the sunlight filtering through the blinds, and opened the stack of documents I had brought from my deployment locker, the edges crisp and the paper still carrying the faint scent of ink and office polish. The lease agreements, HOA notices, and municipal letters lay spread across the table like a map, each detail a clue to how Olivia had managed to exploit the absence of oversight. My eyes traced the names, dates, and signatures, the cursive flowing across the pages, some authentic and others suspiciously precise, the kind of forgery designed to withstand cursory examination. I could feel the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders, the same focus and attention to detail I had applied during reconnaissance missions and operational planning now directed at parsing legal documents and procedural loopholes. Each page I turned carried the subtle scent of paper and the faint mustiness of a house long closed, and with each line, a pattern began to emerge, showing where her interpretation of the rules diverged from fact and where her authority had been assumed rather than granted. I imagined walking through the rooms as I had known them, the hardwood floors cool underfoot, the sunlight bouncing off the windows in warm rectangles, and I could see the furniture carefully positioned, the familiar layout disrupted by unfamiliar hands moving through the space. The kitchen counters, still gleaming, reminded me of mornings spent making coffee, the aroma of roasted beans mingling with the fresh mountain air, a sense of normalcy now contrasted against the intrusion. I could hear the faint click of the door latch as I imagined opening each entryway, the soft squeak of the hinges, and the quiet settling of the house as if it were taking a breath, waiting for the rightful occupant to return. I made detailed notes, connecting the dots between documents, plotting the sequence of actions I would take to restore order while remaining within the bounds of the law, mindful of every precedent and protection afforded to deployed service members. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine resin and the coolness of high-altitude air, and I could almost feel the rhythm of the property itself, the way the land sloped gently, guiding runoff toward the creek, the way the porch overlooked the yard with an unobstructed view, a silent witness to the passage of time. As I worked, I pictured contacting my former platoon, drawing on the discipline, precision, and teamwork we had cultivated over years of service, imagining their perspectives and insights, and how they would help me coordinate the reclamation of the house efficiently and respectfully. Every detail mattered, from the angles of sunlight to the placement of furniture, from the timing of letters to the sequence of communication with the tenants, and I knew that this meticulous preparation was the cornerstone of success, the foundation on which I would rebuild control and restore the integrity of a home that had been entrusted to my family for generations. The quiet determination grew within me, a steady current of focus and resolve, reinforcing that action taken with clarity and forethought would reclaim not just the physical space but the heritage and respect that came with it. Despite my careful review of the documents and the clarity of the facts, the immediate attempts to restore the house through conventional channels were met with frustration. I contacted the local authorities, explaining the deployment context and the protections under federal law, yet the process moved slowly, each call a reminder that bureaucracies valued procedure over urgency. The tenants, oblivious to the legal framework, continued to inhabit the space as if it were their own, moving boxes and arranging furniture with the confidence of possession, while the sun tracked across the sky, casting shifting light patterns on the polished hardwood floors and the hand-painted trim along the windows. I traced each angle in my mind, imagining how the shadows highlighted every piece of furniture, every corner where the fingerprints of unauthorized occupants marred the surfaces, subtle but undeniable signs of their presence. The wind carried a faint scent of autumn leaves and damp pine needles into the open windows, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee that had lingered from morning preparations, grounding me in the physicality of the home even as my thoughts raced through legal strategies. I studied the lease agreements and municipal records again, noting inconsistencies and potential points of leverage, the type of detail that could shift the outcome when presented with precision. Each line became a thread, weaving a map of obligations, rights, and violations that I could follow to untangle the situation. I imagined the front porch where my father had once taught me to sweep the gravel and check for loose boards, the lightness of the broom against the coarse stones, and the way the early sun warmed the steps, a memory that reinforced my connection and authority over the property. With each document reviewed, I mapped potential sequences, the timing of notices, and the channels for intervention, visualizing every phone call, every meeting with the legal team, and the precise presentation of evidence needed to establish my rightful claim. The hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog formed a backdrop to my concentration, the normal rhythms of the neighborhood contrasting sharply with the disruption inside my home. I felt a deepening focus, the same disciplined attention that had served me in countless missions abroad, now applied to the detailed choreography of reclaiming a house through lawful and organized means. Every drawer, every shelf, every window and door became part of a mental checklist, a survey of the space to confirm what had been altered, moved, or misused. I made notes on the placement of key items, the flow of sunlight through each room, and the timing of the tenants' routines, all factors that could inform the timing and execution of formal actions. As the afternoon wore on, the light softened, and I could almost hear the house itself settling, creaking with age but ready to respond to the presence of its rightful steward. The sense of urgency remained tempered by patience, a balance between the desire to act and the recognition that careful planning and thorough documentation would ensure the restoration of control without conflict, guided entirely by knowledge, preparation, and the legal protections established for deployed service members. Each step, each observation, each careful review of evidence reinforced the certainty that the house would be returned to its proper state, its physical integrity and familial legacy preserved, and that every action taken would be deliberate, measured, and fully grounded in respect for both the law and the property itself. As the afternoon light shifted to a softer amber, I leaned over the table, re-examining each document with renewed scrutiny, the texture of the paper crisp under my fingers and the smell of ink mingling with the faint scent of pine drifting in from the open window. I traced each signature, each date, and each clause with careful attention, noting where inconsistencies could be challenged and where federal protections for deployed service members provided a strong foundation. The faint hum of a distant lawn mower and the occasional chirp of birds outside provided a backdrop of normalcy while inside, the weight of responsibility pressed against me with quiet insistence. I visualized the layout of the house, each room, each doorway, and hallway, imagining the flow of the tenants' movement and identifying points where official notices and communications could be placed to assert authority effectively. The polished hardwood floors reflected the shifting light, highlighting areas where furniture had been moved and surfaces touched, subtle signs of occupation that I catalogued carefully in my notes. I considered the kitchen counters, the familiar arrangement of appliances, and the windowsill where my grandmother's marigolds had once thrived, noting the intrusion and the steps necessary to restore the space to its proper condition. I imagined coordinating with my former platoon members, visualizing the sequence of communications, the timing of meetings, and the presentation of evidence, ensuring that every detail was aligned with the legal framework and my understanding of property rights. The air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves mixed with the faint pine, grounding me in the present as my thoughts mapped out the sequence of formal actions required to reclaim control. I moved methodically through each page of documentation, highlighting the federal statutes and local ordinances that would support my case, reinforcing a strategy built on precision and thorough preparation rather than haste. I pictured the exterior of the house, the driveway lined with gravel and pine needles, the slope of the land guiding runoff toward the creek, the porch steps catching the light as shadows lengthened across the lawn, and each element became a reference point for planning communication and legal action. I imagined how each document would be presented, how the facts would align with observations from the property, and how the tenant's compliance could be challenged respectfully but firmly, relying on a combination of detailed evidence and procedural knowledge. The quiet of the late afternoon settled in, yet the sense of purpose remained intense, a focused energy that carried the knowledge that every measured step, every carefully documented observation, and every procedural action would bring the house back under rightful stewardship. The house itself seemed to respond, the faint creaks and groans of settling would almost like a sigh of anticipation, awaiting the restoration of order. I felt the determination sharpen, each sensory detail, each fact, and each procedural insight coalescing into a cohesive plan that would guide the reclamation of the property with both authority and respect, ensuring that the family legacy and the integrity of the home were preserved and returned to their rightful place. By late afternoon, the first signs of action were taking shape, a careful orchestration of communications and coordinated steps that had been planned over hours of review. I reached for the phone and began contacting the members of my former platoon, each conversation precise, concise, and anchored in the facts I had meticulously documented. Their voices came through, calm yet resolute, familiar from years of shared operations, each one understanding immediately the gravity of the situation without needing extensive explanation. I detailed the observations from the property, the inconsistencies in the lease agreements, and the applicable legal protections, emphasizing the importance of patience, timing, and adherence to procedure. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the gravel driveway and highlighting the pine needles scattered along the edges, each detail familiar from countless mornings when I had walked the perimeter and ensured that every stone, every plant, and every feature of the property was in its proper place. I mapped out the sequence of actions, considering the timing of formal notices, the presentation of evidence, and the documentation required to establish irrefutable authority over the property. Each member of the platoon understood their role, observing quietly, verifying the details, and ensuring that all actions aligned with the legal framework and the property rights that had been established for deployed service members. I imagined walking through the house again, the subtle sound of the floorboards underfoot, the cool touch of the railing on the staircase, and the sunlight shifting across the polished surfaces, each element a reference point in the plan. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine resin and the crispness of high-altitude air, mingling with the faint aroma of drying leaves, grounding me in the physical space as I orchestrated the procedural sequence. Every call, every note, and every observation contributed to a layered strategy, the interplay of documentation, timing, and meticulous verification forming a cohesive plan that would leave no room for ambiguity. I visualized delivering the compiled evidence, presenting the documented violations, and asserting the rightful claims over the property, all while maintaining the precision, respect, and discipline that had guided me through countless operations. The house, with its familiar creaks and subtle sounds, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, a silent partner in the orchestration of its own restoration. The driveway, the yard, and each carefully maintained detail of the property became markers in my mental map, guiding the steps that would bring the occupants and the HOA into full awareness of the legal reality. As the light softened further, I felt the culmination of preparation and strategy settle over me like a second skin, a combination of focus, patience, and readiness that ensured every forthcoming action would be measured, deliberate, and effective, preserving both the integrity of the home and the legacy of the family who had entrusted it to my care. Every minute of preparation, every observation recorded, and every layer of legal and procedural understanding created a framework for reclaiming the property with authority, clarity, and respect, readying the moment when control would finally return to its rightful steward. The moment of resolution arrived with the quiet inevitability of sunrise spilling across the Colorado peaks, painting the pines and driveway in warm, golden light. I stood at the edge of the property, phone in hand, confirming final arrangements with the legal team and the platoon members who had been briefed meticulously on every step. Each detail was aligned, the timing of official notices, the verification of documents, and the precise sequence of communications that ensured authority and clarity would be unassailable. As I approached the front door, I could hear the subtle creaks of the floorboards inside, a familiar cadence that resonated with the years of memories embedded within each room. The tenants, now aware that their occupancy had been reviewed against federal protections and the thorough documentation I had gathered, met the news with surprise and acknowledgement, their movements careful, the subtle shifting of boxes and personal items underscoring the gravity of the situation. The porch steps felt solid beneath my feet, the wood warm from the afternoon sun, and the scent of pine and autumn leaves drifting in through the open windows created a serene contrast to the tension that had filled the house for weeks. I walked through each room methodically, checking the arrangement of furniture, ensuring that each space reflected the rightful order and that every detail of the household was accounted for, the polished surfaces and familiar textures confirming that control had been re-established. Outside, the yard appeared undisturbed yet ready to receive my attention again, the gravel driveway raked and the pines swaying gently, their needles scattering softly across the ground with the afternoon breeze. I could hear the distant sound of a neighbor's lawn mower slowing, the birds settling into the trees for the evening, and in that quiet, the house exhaled, returning to the rhythm that had always defined it. Each room, each corridor, and each carefully preserved memory within the walls now reflected the authority and stewardship that I had meticulously restored, a tangible result of patience, preparation, and strategic action. I reviewed the documentation one final time, the signatures, dates, and clauses confirming the legal and procedural completion of the reclamation, while the light shifted and deepened the colors of the interior, highlighting every corner, every surface, every familiar feature. The sense of accomplishment was subtle yet profound, grounded not in spectacle but in the careful, deliberate steps that had been taken to ensure that the house and its legacy were rightfully restored. Every creak, every sunbeam, and every faint scent of pine and polished wood underscored the re-establishment of order, the quiet assertion of authority, and the preservation of the memories and care invested over generations. I paused at the threshold, taking in the view of the yard, the driveway, and the familiar exterior of the house, knowing that the property was now secure, respected, and fully returned to the stewardship of those who had earned it, and that the lessons of patience, meticulous planning, and respect for the law had ensured a resolution that was as definitive as it was just. The sun dipped lower behind the distant peaks, bathing the property in a warm, golden haze that highlighted every familiar feature with clarity and reassurance. I stood at the edge of the porch, the textured wood warm under my hands, the soft rustle of pine needles carried on a gentle breeze, and I felt the quiet satisfaction of meticulous preparation coming to fruition. Every document, every phone call, and every observation had converged into a coherent strategy that restored not only control of the house but the dignity and history embedded in its walls. I walked through each room with measured steps, noting the polished floors, the alignment of furniture, and the faint scent of cedar and aged leather that had always marked the home as ours. Sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the edges of the countertops, the detail in the cabinetry, and the subtle imperfections that only years of family use could create, confirming the authenticity and rightful ownership of every element within. The house had a rhythm, a quiet pulse of familiarity, and now that rhythm was in harmony with the knowledge that justice had been served in a deliberate, precise, and lawful manner. Outside, the driveway and yard reflected the careful maintenance and pride of ownership, the gravel evenly spread, pine needles gently scattered by the breeze, and the slope of the land guiding runoff toward the creek exactly as it had been designed. I reviewed in my mind the series of communications with my former platoon, legal counsel, and municipal authorities, recognizing that every detail had contributed to a seamless restoration without unnecessary confrontation, relying instead on preparation, authority, and evidence-based action. The subtle shift of sunlight across the floors mirrored the passage of time and the patient unfolding of a plan executed with discipline, each ray illuminating spaces that had once been disrupted but were now secure, orderly, and respected. I paused by the kitchen window, observing the marigolds that my grandmother had planted, their petals catching the light, a reminder of the continuity of care, stewardship, and legacy. The quiet settling of the house, the faint creak of the floorboards as they adjusted to the returning presence of their rightful steward, and the gentle whisper of the wind through the pines all underscored the restoration of balance and authority. In that moment, the property was not merely reclaimed, it was reaffirmed as a space of family heritage, stability, and rightful occupancy, safeguarded by careful attention to detail, patience, and the disciplined application of knowledge. Every corner, every hallway, every element of the house reflected the outcome of deliberate action, methodical planning, and unwavering commitment to justice. Standing on the porch, the afternoon light warming my face, I realized that the resolution was as much about honoring the history and memories within these walls as it was about asserting control, and that the sense of achievement was grounded in the quiet certainty that the house, the yard, and all it contained had returned to its rightful place, fully restored, and respected in both spirit and law, a testament to the enduring principle that justice, when pursued with diligence, patience, and clarity, is both inevitable and deeply satisfying.